Hi, my name is Andy Wiener. I'm a photographer who's been producing what's called constructed narrative photography over a number of years. I studied at the Royal College of Art in London in the late 80s, but before studying photography I'd actually studied medicine and qualified as a doctor. And subsequent to my time at the Royal College, after a few years working as a photographer, but then also doing some work in the field of psychiatry, which is a branch of medicine, I then went on to become a consultant in child and adolescent psychiatry and continued doing photography as well. My work is very pleased it's in the collections of the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, and also the National Portrait Gallery in Edinburgh have some of my work. I had a solo exhibition in 1990 which went on tour around the UK, and a few sort of flurries into the USA and Europe, which was nice as well. I'd like to tell you about a series of photographs I produced which is called Life Story Work. And this is 15 pictures. They're designed to be seen not on the web or anything, but in real life in a gallery situation where the prints are pretty big. They're roughly a metre high each, so they give quite an impact when you see them. And I think it's usually best when you're working with photography that you don't just want to take individual images. You want to link together pictures in groups or series. And what I like to do is to create a narrative through a series of images, so that you sort of get involved in a story that's told through the images. And so the life story in the photographs is actually my own life story, but and I feature in all of the pictures except one, which is called The Husband, which is I've montaged the face of my wife onto my own body, but which might seem rather sort of egocentric thing to do, but I think that the intention is that through photographing myself and exposing different parts of my identity, I'd be encouraging other people to think about their identities and where they've come from and what sort of facets there are to their personalities. Right, I'm going to talk a bit about some of the images in life story work. The first one I'd like to talk about is a picture called The German. My father is a German Jew who came over to the UK when he was 13 years old in 1939, and I wanted to take a photograph that represented where he grew up, where he came from. So I actually, with my daughter, who was going to be the photographer of this picture because I was in it, went on a journey to Eastern Europe to follow his footsteps. And we went to the different towns where he had been, where he had lived at different parts of his life before moving to Great Britain. And none of the pictures really seemed to be working. So one night we thought, well, what we really need to do is to go to Auschwitz. So we were about 200 kilometers away from Auschwitz, and we drove and drove and drove. And finally, and it was raining solidly all the way there. And then, amazingly, when we arrived at Auschwitz, the sun came out, but there was still lots of storm clouds around. So I was able to get this background picture of the death camp with storm clouds all around, which I thought was I was really pleased with. The idea of the picture is that I had a great uncle who had actually fought in World War I. He was a German Jew, and he'd been in the German army, and like many other young Germans who were in the forces, was awarded the Iron Cross for his service. But then when World War II came along, the tables were completely turned, and he was deported to a camp in Czechoslovakia called Theresienstadt, and then 3 years later he and his wife were transported to the death camp and gassed. And that is the very spot in this picture where him and his wife, where their lives ended. And what's so bizarre is that all this was carefully recorded. So I have a document that was in the Jewish archive of when he was born, when he died, where he was transported to. And so this picture represents the Iron Cross from the past, reaching up and touching the present with my hand coming down from the sky and also from the ground. After I made the image, I guess I thought of the famous picture of the hand of God coming down, but that wasn't in my mind at the time. It was more to do with the past and the future making contact through that sort of fragile connection with the past. The other image I might talk about is called the infant. The inspiration for this picture was about my relationship with my mother, but as I said earlier, with life story work, I act all the parts. So in this image, I act the part of myself as an infant and also the part of my mother. And me and my mum, we sort of have our ups and downs, and that was something, a sort of tension that I wanted to portray in this image about that. But I also talked earlier about how I want images to have an impact, and so mother and son, clearly the archetype for this is Mary and Jesus. So this picture draws directly on an early Renaissance painting by Bellini of of Mary with the infant Jesus. And Bellini was an important painter in the Renaissance because previously there'd been lots of pictures of Mary and child, but they were very abstract. They looked as if they were very they were these sort of icons that weren't really sort of in touch with the world. They were really the view of the world from the eye of God, where things were eternal, things were perfect. What happened on earth was of really very little significance compared to what was happening in heaven. And when the Renaissance painters came along, they wanted to paint things from a particular perspective, from a moment, a truthful, fragile moment on earth. So that's when images of Mary and child started to look as if they actually took place in a moment in history. And in this picture here, clearly it looks pretty surreal, which I quite like, but the clothes, for example, of Mary, I went to Primark and bought a whole load of white sort of tops. They had to be long sleeves, because in the Bellini painting, everything she wears is long sleeves, and it had to be a particular shade of pink. So I spent quite a bit of time dyeing various of these tops from Primark till I got the colour right, and bought a blue shirt. Various blue shirts were sort of purchased and rejected until I got the one that seemed to be right. And then I thought, well, this is a kind of hippie sort of situation, and got some sandals, maybe a sort of vague reference to the past. And then I got one of these hyper-realistic dolls, and so obviously it's two images here, one me holding the doll and the other one, and then I photographed my face with the same lighting at the same time so that things would match up, and with Photoshop stuck my face onto the doll. I'd like to talk about two other bodies of work which were made in late 1980s up to the beginning of into 1990. The first is A Rake's Progress. I made this series of images when I was a student at the Royal College of Art. I arrived there having a background in landscape photography and portraiture, but I wanted to sort of push the limits, and I was quite interested in the idea of photographs not being authentic, so I wanted to take pictures that showed very clearly that what was going on in the picture wasn't trustworthy, was sort of false. And also, I was very influenced by the work of Cindy Sherman, and at that time she had put herself in various photographs. She photographed herself in various settings, sometimes making herself look very vulnerable, and it forced the viewer of this picture to was forced to look at Cindy Sherman looking as if she was uncomfortable and didn't want to be looked at, even though she'd photographed herself like that. Anyway, so I thought, well, how about if I protect the people in my photographs by putting masks over their faces so they can't be identified. And this led to me making myself the subject again, like Cindy Sherman. So in a way I was sparing my subjects the humility of being seen in various uncompromising situations. Often they might be naked or so on. And I would sort of take the rap, so to speak, by having my face over their faces. And then I just started having some fun. I referenced the work of William Hogarth, who had done a narrative series about a Rake's Progress. I think it was 1740 something, I forget exactly. So he told the story of this rake who gained an inheritance, squandered it all on prostitutes and high living and food and trying to buy friendship. And eventually he went bankrupt and ended up in prison. And at the end of the story he goes mad, and there's a famous picture of him in Bedlam, the mental hospital Bedlam. Anyway, so my rake decides to do things differently. So in the first image he is born, and then he becomes a child, and it's all sort of totally happy. And then he sort of moves on and decides that he's going to be an eligible bachelor who's going to do the proper thing in life. And at the time there was a book that was by Germaine Greer called The Female Eunuch, that talks about how people are selfish and try to sort of marry someone who's just like them. So in this series I took this to the limits, and there's a scene called Marriage, a photograph called Marriage, where this poor boy marries himself. And then of course it's all downhill from there. I think his sin in this series is this sort of egotistical approach to who he chooses as a wife. The marriage breaks down, and through the remaining images at the end there, he finds himself also in Bedlam, in the modern Bedlam of the living room. The second series I'd like to talk about is called Love Scenes. This was done a couple of years, 2-3 years after A Rake's Progress. And again, I wanted people's identities to be hidden, but this time I wanted them to act out an imaginary life lived by Barbie and Ken. So I got a camera with a very close-up lens and zoomed in on the faces of Barbie and Ken, and was able to make life-size photographic masks of the dolls. And then again, just had some fun. Imagine that, again, Barbie met the perfect man, who was Ken, clearly, who'd been made just for her. And they go off into this happy life together with lots of their other Barbie and Ken friends. But then this particular Barbie, she gets a little bit distracted or bored or something and wonders about what would happen if she ditched Ken and went out with He-Man. So in these images, He-Man in the middle series of 5, there's 5 pictures in the middle that show the birth of He-Man into the life of Barbie. And then the final 4 pictures, again, as in most of my work, everything is sort of downhill from there, as He-Man turns out to be a demanding, destructive child, which in fact is what he is, and things go wrong, but at the very end there is a happy ending in the last series, last image called Conclusion, where Barbie and Ken escape to TV heaven. So it's all quite light-hearted, but I think there are sort of deeper meanings here about identity and about how we decide who we're going to be. Is this part of our own creation? Do we define our own destiny? Or are we part of a group that defines a destiny for us? To a large extent, I think the latter is true. We can take quite a bit of control for what we do, but there are limits within which we can operate.